The light inside the grand synodal chamber of the Volcari hegemony was not produced by combustion or electrical excitation, but by the slow, painful transmutation of deep core elements channeled through crystalline conduits embedded within the obsidian floor, casting a perpetual shadow play of austere, uncompromising power across the vaulted ceiling, which stretched kilometers into a geometrically perfect apex, designed to humble all supplicants, even those who sat upon the elevated thrones of the high curators themselves. Today, however, that architectural weight felt inverted, pressing down with paralyzing psychological force upon the assembled beings who represented the culmination of 12,000 cycles of structured galactic dominance. For their absolute authority had been challenged not by overwhelming force, nor by cunning rebellion, but by absolute silence. A silence that had somehow manifested, acted, and then vanished, leaving behind only the cold dread of impossibility. High Curator Xyler, whose segmented exoskeleton bore the patina of 10 millennia of political friction and existential decision-making, gripped the armrests of his ceremonial perch, his optical clusters fixed on the central data well where the projected telemetry shrieked not with threat, but with negation. The incident, now formally designated the ephemeral penetration, had occurred across 3 separate, non-contiguous deep space sectors crucial to the hegemony's defense grid, sectors governed by algorithms designed to register microfluctuations in dark matter flow, let alone the passage of a solid object accelerating to FTL velocities. Yet the penetration had occurred meticulously, perfectly, and without generating a single quantum echo or thermal whisper, defying the very foundational postulates of Volcari physics and operational security. The absurdity of the data does not diminish its consequence, synods, Xyler stated, his voice a low, resonant vibration that carried effortlessly across the vast expanse, laced with the brittle edge of controlled fear. We have reviewed the projections. We have cross-referenced the archives against all known belligerent capabilities. The consensus remains stable and, frankly, terrifying. Whatever performed the ephemeral penetration was either non-corporeal, utilizing technology that invalidates the principle of mass energy equivalence, or it was so far beyond our technological comprehension that to call it an artifact is an insult to the scale of its capabilities. The fact remains, it entered the inner sanctum, accessed restricted intelligence nexus row 7, performed a pinpoint data extraction, a retrieval of less than 1 kilobyte, senators, and departed, all within the span of a tertiary blink. And we, the architects of this arm of the galaxy, detected nothing but the resultant absence. A sharp, chitinous clack echoed from the opposite dais, where Curator Xarthus, representative of the military-industrial complex and advocate for immediate, uncompromising retaliation, stirred restlessly. High Curator, we cannot continue to treat this as a metaphysical puzzle. It is an act of war, or worse, an act of contemptuous trespass. The retrieval of 1 kilobyte of data, insignificant though the volume may be, concerned the precise gravitational constants required to destabilize the primary energy cascade of the Kalis hub. Knowledge of that constant is held only by the highest echelons of this chamber. To extract it means the entity understood its immense potential utility, even if it has not yet utilized the destructive application. I demand we cease this introspection and designate the responsible species, if one exists, for immediate strategic eradication. If we do not project overwhelming, instant force now, we concede the right to exist. The argument was a familiar, depressing rhythm in the chamber. Xyler, representing the measured philosophical continuity of the hegemony versus Xarthus, the embodiment of reactive, overwhelming military projection. The conflict itself was a structural weakness the hegemony could no longer afford. Xyler centered his focus, allowing the silence following Xarthus's declaration to stretch taut like a hyperstressed tension cable before responding. And whom do you propose we target, Curator Xarthus? The Krell Directorate, who are demonstrably incapable of masking a vessel the size of a primary shuttle. The Silth conglomerate, whose entire technological base relies on thermal bloom for propulsion. Or perhaps, Xyler paused, leaning forward, the movement slow and deliberate, designed to draw every eye in the massive room. Perhaps you suggest we target the variable which defies all logic, the species that remains the only entity operating in that quadrant whose technological potential is wholly uncatalogued, and whose psychological profile remains aggressively unpredictable. The humans. A collective intake of breath, silent but palpable, rippled through the chamber. The designation was almost taboo. Humanity, the newcomers, the ephemeral footnote in the galactic ledger, barely cleared the minimum technological threshold for independent interstellar travel. Yet they maintained a perplexing, almost defiant neutrality, insisting on governing their own tiny, densely populated sector with baffling efficiency, despite their apparent lack of monumental infrastructure or discernible military fleets. They were known for chaotic art forms, unnecessary biological fragility, and an unnerving tendency towards self-correction that defied the cyclical patterns of all other known sapient life. The Volcari analysts had dismissed them as a low-level anomaly, a species too preoccupied with internal conflict and short-sighted biological imperative to ever pose a threat to structured galactic order. They were the dust beneath the monumental boot of the hegemony. "The humans are a distraction," Zarthus scoffed, though the resonance in his voice faltered slightly. "Their largest vessels are crude, loud, and entirely visible across standard sensory arrays. They possess no known stealth technologies capable of defeating even our early warning perimeter, let alone penetrating the inner sanctum. To attribute the ephemeral penetration to them is a failure of imagination, high curator. It is to suggest that a child has somehow disassembled the power reactor of this entire citadel without touching a single component. And yet, Zarthus, where did the ghost vessel appear and where did it ultimately dissipate?" Xyler countered, pressing the projection into focus. The map of the galaxy flared into agonizing detail. 3 penetration points formed a perfect orbital triangle around a single, highly contested resource point known as the Cerulean Nebula. But the final point of dissipation, the last place where the impossibility had flickered out of existence, lay less than a light cycle from the human protectorate border. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the greatest variable in any conflict is the one that is dismissed. We catalogued human psychology as chaotic, driven by raw, unmodulated emotion. But what if that chaos is merely the surface tension of a deep, highly disciplined logical construct we failed to perceive? What if their supposed weakness is their greatest strength, their inherent unpredictability? The chamber fell into a deep, agonizing silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the crystalline conduits. Xyler knew the core issue was not the missing data or the security breach. The core issue was the hegemony's inability to categorize or contain the concept of the ghost ship. It was an object that should not exist, operating with a tactical grace that implied a level of philosophical detachment and technological mastery that shattered the Volcari's self-assured superiority. It was the absolute threat to their foundational belief that power equaled measurable scale. "We have initiated contact protocols with the human protectorate," Xyler announced, overriding Zarthus's sputtering protest. "Not as an act of aggression, nor as an interrogation. We are presenting them with a formal request for information regarding anomalous energy signatures detected near their territorial claims. We will observe their reaction. We will analyze the structure of their diplomacy. If they react with fear, panic, or denial, then we confirm their status as a peripheral concern. But if they respond with the same unnerving, calm certainty that defined the precise nature of the ephemeral penetration." His voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging heavy in the atmosphere. The fate of the hegemony, perhaps the structured continuity of the entire local spiral arm, might rest on the measured, unreadable response of the species they had so casually categorized as juvenile. The communication delay was agonizing, stretched across 3 standard cycles, far longer than the Volcari expected for a species that supposedly prized rapid interaction. The Volcari receiving station, a massive, slow-moving orbital platform designated the Scrutiny of Ages asterisk, was designed for grand, formal interactions, projecting an aura of overwhelming historical continuity and non-negotiable gravitational pull. On its primary holographic projection stage, High Curator Xyler waited, flanked by diplomatic and tactical experts, all observing the projected transmission window with focused, meticulous anxiety. They expected distortion, perhaps a panicked, underbriefed human liaison, or even a diplomatic refusal packaged in overly complex emotional language. What they received was silence, perfectly modulated. Then the holographic window shimmered, resolving into an image of stark, almost disconcerting clarity. It was not a grand chamber nor a military bridge, but a space of unadorned, pale gray walls, minimalist to the point of asceticism. And centered within that space was the human ambassador Lyra Vance. She was bio, logically unremarkable by Volcari standards. Slender, fragile, encased in simple, tailored dark attire that offered no insignia of rank or affiliation. Yet her presence resonated with an authority that was entirely internal, expressed not through volume or posture, but through an unnerving stillness. Her eyes, magnified slightly by the projection, were fixed upon Xyler with an expression that was neither hostile nor subservient, but profoundly, deeply aware. It was the look of a scientist observing a complex, predictable mechanism. "High Curator Xyler," her voice finally resonated, translated instantly and perfectly into the Volcari resonant frequency, devoid of the distracting harmonics and emotional fluctuations typically associated with human speech. It was calm, measured, and carried the specific gravity of absolute certainty. "We acknowledge the formal diplomatic request transmitted from the scrutiny of ages asterisk. We understand your concern regarding anomalous energy signatures and perceived incursions within designated hegemony space." Xyler initiated the response, maintaining the hegemony's formal protocol of gravitas and implied superiority. "Ambassador Vance, the hegemony does not speak of perceived incursions. We speak of objective data. A single vessel, utilizing technology wholly unknown to our sensor arrays, penetrated the inner sanctum, operated with surgical precision, and vanished without generating a single measurable trace. We are aware of the vessel's proximity to your protectorate prior to its final disappearance. We require immediate, comprehensive disclosure regarding any and all involvement the human protectorate may have had with this ghost ship and the operational context of its mission." He emphasized the term ghost ship, injecting a tone of fear and accusation. He waited for defensiveness, for evasion, for the expected human panic under pressure. Ambassador Vance merely tilted her head slightly, a movement of minimal energetic expenditure that nonetheless commanded attention. She did not deny the existence of the vessel, nor did she attempt to deflect the accusation. "We appreciate the specificity of your designation, High Curator," she replied. "The vessel you refer to is designated by us as the Ethuria. It is a research and stabilization prototype. And yes, it is entirely of human manufacture and operation." The statement hit the Volcari delegation with the force of an unexpected planetary collision. A sharp, audible hiss of shock escaped one of the tactical analysts standing behind Xyler. Zarthus, monitoring the transmission from the main citadel, was likely already roaring in outrage. The sheer, unadulterated admission was completely outside the expected parameters of international diplomacy. "You admit to this monumental trespass?" Xyler asked, maintaining a difficult composure, his internal processing systems working furiously to recontextualize this revelation. "You acknowledge violating the sovereign space of the Volcari hegemony with a vessel that possesses the capability of rendering our entire defensive apparatus obsolete." "We acknowledge the journey of the Ethuria," Vance corrected gently. Her precision was unnerving. "We dispute the designation of trespass under the specific circumstances. We operated in full observation of the asterisk protocol of non-interference with existential risk asterisk. And as to your defensive apparatus, High Curator, the Ethuria's operational mandate is not predicated on rendering military technology obsolete, but rather on circumventing limitations imposed by conventional spatial modeling. It is, as you observed, a vessel that operates beyond the current parameters of your physics." Xyler felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. This was not arrogance. It was simple statement of fact, delivered without boast or apology. The calmness of her disclosure was more intimidating than any fleet deployment. "Explain the operational context, Ambassador," Xyler commanded, dropping all pretense of diplomatic maneuvering. "Explain why a vessel capable of this unprecedented stealth was utilized to steal an insignificant piece of data concerning the Kalis hub. If this was a demonstration of capability, it was an overly subtle one." Vance finally allowed a faint, complex expression, a look of profound, almost wearisome empathy to cross her face. "High Curator, the Ethuria was not deployed to steal data. It was deployed to perform a localized temporal correction, utilizing the data you refer to. The Kalis hub, while critical to your power infrastructure, is not merely a reactor. It is built upon a primordial energy nexus, an unstable node of zero-point fluctuation that predates the hegemony. Our long-range telemetry, compiled over the last 80 standard cycles, indicated that the hub's control algorithms installed by your engineers, were inducing a resonant feedback loop that, while minor in the short term, was projected to result in a catastrophic cascade failure across the entire node cluster within approximately 4.7 standard cycles. This failure would not only destroy the Kalis hub, but release enough localized dark energy to fracture the stability of the immediate surrounding sectors, potentially leading to gravitational collapse across several inhabited systems. She paused, allowing the gravity of her statement to settle. The Volcari experts behind Xyler were already frantically cross-referencing her claim. The Kalis hub was an engineering marvel, its stability considered absolute. The notion of catastrophic failure was absurd. "Your assessment is alarming, but unsubstantiated," Xyler challenged, though his own doubt was beginning to corrode his certainty. "Our own long-term predictive models show the hub operating well within safety parameters for the next 2,000 cycles." "Your models, High Curator," Vance responded patiently, "rely on the assumption of a static spacetime background and Newtonian gravitational mechanics for the core flux. They do not account for the influence of what we term residual echoes, subspatial distortions left by the prior, far more advanced civilization that engineered the Nexus." The specific kilobyte of data the Etheria retrieved and immediately utilized was the precise constant required to recalibrate the hub's primary graviton compressor, shifting its operational frequency outside the destabilizing range of the residual echoes. The Etheria performed the surgical correction, confirmed system stability, and then exited the zone. It was a preemptive intervention, not an act of hostility. The implications were staggering. Humans, the species dismissed as technologically juvenile, were claiming not only superior operational stealth, but also a vastly deeper understanding of fundamental, cosmic engineering that underpinned the hegemony's greatest infrastructure. The Volcari had built a mansion on sand they did not know was quicksand, and the humans had quietly stabilized the foundation without asking for permission or thanks, simply because the alternative was the collapse of the neighborhood. "Why," Xyler pressed, his voice now lower, tinged with a new, unwelcome humility, "did you not contact us? Why risk an act of war by employing a ghost ship when diplomacy could have achieved the same result?" Ambassador Vance's gaze seemed to deepen, penetrating beyond the holographic projection and into the soul of Volcari political inertia. "High Curator, we monitored the debate within your chamber for the standard response delay. We possess sophisticated predictive modeling concerning the diplomatic response matrices of the hegemony. Had we initiated contact and warned you of the imminent failure, your internal processes would have required A. Verification of the claim, B. Allocation of resources for investigation, C. Debate over the political implications of accepting assistance from a Tier 4 species, D. Assignment of an engineering team, and E. The logistical challenge of deploying a vessel to perform the correction." She paused, allowing Xyler to calculate the elapsed time for this bureaucratic cascade. "Total projected minimum time required for hegemony response," Vance concluded simply, was 6.3 standard cycles. The window for successful non-catastrophic correction was 0.8 cycles. Diplomacy in this instance was a guaranteed extinction event. We chose efficient action over political expediency. The ghost ship was necessary because your structure could not accommodate the necessary speed of ethical response. This was the core of the human reveal. Their ethics were not based on moral declarations or complex treaties. They were based on consequence and efficiency. They were calm because they were logical, and their logic demanded the preservation of life, even the lives of those who mistrusted them, through the quickest, most technologically capable means available. The Etheria was not a weapon. It was an ethical imperative given physical form, the ghost that had to strike, not to destroy, but to stabilize what the hegemony, in its scale and arrogance, had destabilized. The aftermath of the diplomatic exchange was a period of political and intellectual cataclysm within the Volcari citadel. Curator Zarthus, initially apoplectic, demanding an immediate armed response against the human protectorate for the insulting paternalism of their intervention, found his position rapidly dissolving. The hegemony's own independent deep-core structural integrity analysis, conducted under intense scrutiny, returned confirmation of Ambassador Vance's claims. The Kalis hub had indeed been operating on a dangerously resonant frequency. Furthermore, the subtle, near-undetectable correction performed by the asterisk Etheria was now maintaining a level of stability previously considered impossible. The data was undeniable, and it painted the human protectorate not as a belligerent, but as a overwhelmingly capable protector. Xyler convened a private, highly restricted session of the High Curators, bypassing the usual synodal posturing. The air in the smaller, more severe chamber was thick with the scent of volatile political change. "We have erred," Xyler stated, dispensing with formal greetings, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of misplaced certainty. We judge them by our own metrics of ambition, visibility, and military noise. We mistook silence for weakness and complexity for confusion. The humans, it appears, are operating within a paradigm of technological maturity that renders our conventional definition of power, the capacity for large-scale destruction and slow, inexorable expansion, primitive. Curator Thasla, the chief technologist, shifted uneasily, her multiple appendages tracing patterns of deep intellectual distress on the polished table. High Curator, the physics of the Ethuria asterisk, the ghost ship, continue to baffle our researchers. We can confirm its existence, its actions, and its effect, but we cannot replicate the mechanism. It seems to utilize what their ambassador termed event horizon navigation. They are moving not through standard space, nor through the conventional folds of subspace utilized by our FTL drives, but through the residual informational density of spacetime itself. They are quite literally ghosts in the machine of the cosmos. And their ethical framework, added Curator Geth, the chief philosophical advisor, is equally confounding. They did not intervene for profit, for land, or for political gain. They intervened because the impending catastrophe violated their core logical imperative of minimizing existential risk. They seem to view the entire galaxy as a complex, fragile ecosystem requiring constant, localized stabilization. They hold themselves accountable for risks they didn't even create. Where does this ethical rigidity come from? Xyler regarded Geth with a steady gaze. It comes from their history, Curator. We cataloged the long, violent, self-destructive phase of their evolution as proof of their inherent instability. We saw the chaos, the warfare, the constant near-extinction events. But what if those events forged a discipline beyond our comprehension? What if the constant proximity to self-annihilation created an absolute, non-negotiable value system that prioritizes consequence over intent? They learned, through cycles of brutal self-correction, that power must be restrained, invisible, and utterly efficient in its deployment, lest it trigger the very collapse it seeks to prevent. The realization was a bitter pill. The hegemony, with its massive fleets and thousand-year construction projects, was structurally incapable of the ethical maturity required by truly advanced technology. They would have used the ghost ship's technology to conquer. The humans used it to maintain structural integrity. The next diplomatic interaction was initiated by Xyler, but this time the tone was not one of inquiry or threat, but of profound, unsettling request. Xyler requested a face-to-face, in-person meeting with Ambassador Vance, to be held on neutral territory, a derelict mining station situated near the boundary where the hegemony's known space ended and the vast, uncatalogued void began. Ambassador Vance accepted immediately, stipulating only one condition: that the meeting be confined to a minimal enclosed space, allowing for conversation predicated on focused, undistracted analysis. The meeting itself was a study in cultural contrast. Xyler arrived with a complement of highly trained security personnel and scientific observers, all keeping a respectful, yet wary distance. Ambassador Vance arrived on a small, unadorned transport ship that docked silently, disembarking alone, carrying nothing but a small, datapad-sized device. In the small, dimly lit room carved out of the station's rusted superstructure, the High Curator and the Ambassador sat facing each other across a plain metal table. The weight of galactic history settled between them. "Ambassador Vance," Xyler began, foregoing all preliminary formalities, "your species has demonstrated a capacity for silent intervention that negates our entire concept of strategic defense. We are not prepared for this. We are, frankly, afraid of the implications of such power wielded by an unknown variable. I ask you now not as a representative of the hegemony, but as one who guides the future of a civilization. What is your ultimate ambition? What is the goal of the human protectorate?" Vance met his gaze steadily, her posture relaxed, yet utterly prepared. "High Curator, you seek an answer couched in the language of ambition, territory, resource acquisition, political realignment. Our ambition is far simpler and far more complex. It is to achieve sufficient technological competence to ensure the long-term, non-zero probability of sapient existence in this sector. We seek stability. W. We seek continuity. We seek the mastery required to manage the cosmic variables that inherently destabilize complex life." Xyler leaned forward, his segmented faceplates registering intense concentration. "The cosmic variables? You refer to the inherent instability of the Kalis hub. Are there others?" "The Kalis hub was a localized, anthropogenic risk," Vance stated, confirming the Volcari had destabilized their own power source. "That was a simple maintenance issue amplified by inadequate modeling. The true variables are external. They are the reasons we invested in the Etheria project, the development of what you termed the ghost ship. She activated the small device she carried. A highly complex, three-dimensional projection shimmered into existence above the table. It was not a map of the local sector, but a deep-field astronomical chart, focusing on the vast, empty regions beyond the known edges of the local spiral arm, regions the Volcari had labeled the silent frontier. Zones considered too distant and resource-poor to warrant investigation. Volcari hegemony, and indeed all known major galactic powers, focused their efforts and their defenses internally, towards resource optimization, navigable jump points, and the protection of developed infrastructure, Vance explained, gesturing to the dense, clustered regions of the map that represented the civilized cosmos. You perceive risk as something generated by competition or internal political decay. You do not perceive the risk generated by absolute, overwhelming cosmic scale. She zoomed the projection into a seemingly blank region of the silent frontier. Here, faint, complex patterns of energy fluctuation began to resolve. They were not thermal signatures nor gravitational anomalies, but patterns in the quantum vacuum itself. For the last millennia, we have been running continuous high-resolution surveillance on this boundary, Vance continued. Our earliest FTL drives required radical breakthroughs in subspace modeling, breakthroughs that alerted us to certain universal constants that the rest of the galaxy seems to have ignored. Specifically, the mathematics that govern the true nature of structured energy transfer across vast, intergalactic distances. The patterns on the map resolved into something recognizable, the faint, residual shadow of a hypermassive structure. It was not a planet, nor a star, nor a conventional construct. It was a grid miles long, kilometers deep, stretching across light-years of space, a truly colossal megastructure, ancient, inert, and impossibly complex. It seemed to have been abandoned for eons, but its structural shadow still permeated the local group. This structure, Vance stated, her voice dropping slightly, imbued with a seriousness that chilled Xyler, is designated by us as the architectural silence. It is a construct engineered by an intelligence so vast that its purpose remains fundamentally opaque to our best predictive models. We estimate it has been quiescent for at least 30 million standard cycles. However, 20 standard cycles ago, the Etheria project detected the most minute, yet mathematically significant, change in its residual energy signature. She tapped the projection. A single rhythmic pulse began to emit from the projected location of the silent architecture. It was not loud, but it was relentless. This is not a signal, High Curator, Vance clarified. It is a mathematical imperative. It is a slow, methodical attempt by the quiescent structure to self-repair, or more accurately, to self-initiate. And the Etheria, the ghost ship that shouldn't exist, was engineered specifically to monitor and, if necessary, preemptively interact with structures of this scale and complexity, operating entirely beyond the detection capabilities of any civilization that might prematurely try to investigate, or, worse, attempt to weaponize it. Xyler felt the overwhelming, sickening shift in perspective. His entire life had been spent managing the internal political turbulence of a local empire. Now he was confronted with a threat that transcended scale, time, and comprehension, a threat the humans had known about, studied, and prepared for in absolute silence, while the hegemony debated trade routes and border security. If this structure is activating, what is its objective? Xyler whispered, the philosophical weight of the moment almost crushing his composure. Vance shook her head slowly. We do not know its objective. We only know its effect on the immediate gravitational stability of the local cluster. The activation of the silent architecture is inducing a cascading energetic drift across all known energy conduits, including the primordial nexus points that underpin your Kalis hub, and the thousands of other similar structures scattered across hegemony space. The Kalis incident was not an isolated event. It was the first symptom of a vastly larger, deeper cosmic systemic failure. Rigored by the architect's self-initiation, she paused, allowing the monumental nature of the crisis to sink in. High Curator, the Etheria was needed not because we mistrusted you, but because the crisis was too large for conventional diplomacy, too subtle for conventional detection, and too rapid for conventional response. The Ghost strike was merely preventative maintenance on a planetary scale. We needed to stabilize the hub before the larger flux fractured the entire region. Xyler understood. The Ghost ship was not a vessel of war. It was a scalpel of cosmic maintenance, wielded by a species that recognized the true enemy was not other life, but the inherent chaos of the universe itself, manifested through the actions of incomprehensibly ancient forces. The humans were not chaotic. They were the ultimate agents of order, operating on a timescale and scope that made the Volcari hegemony look like a brief, noisy interlude. "We came here, High Curator," Vance concluded, her voice unwavering, not for confrontation but to establish a foundation of trust based on operational transparency. The ghost ship existed because the scale of the threat demanded silence, precision, and overwhelming capability. Now, however, the activation of the silent architecture is accelerating. Its signal, the mathematical imperative, is becoming louder. It is now too large for even the asterisk Etheria to manage alone. We require an alliance, not of fleets and armies, but of resources, intelligence, and unified purpose. We require the hegemony's logistical capacity, and perhaps most importantly, its political discipline to manage the impending fear. The shift was complete. The species that should have been crushed under the hegemony's might was now offering a path to survival, contingent upon the hegemony learning to trust the silent, the subtle, and the overwhelmingly ethical. The unification process was arduous, fraught with internal Volcari resistance. Curator Zarthus and his conservative allies fought bitterly against the perceived humiliation of relying on human guidance, citing the fundamental distrust of a species whose motives were so alienly logical. Xyler, however, had the undeniable proof of the Kalis hub's stabilization and the increasingly alarming data flowing from the silent frontier. He used the structure of the hegemony itself, its deep-seated respect for undeniable objective data, to force the alliance through. The humans, in turn, were uncompromising in their requirements. They did not demand territory or resources. They demanded absolute operational freedom for their research elements and the complete integration of Volcari deep space telemetry into the human predictive network. This necessitated the sharing of core Volcari technological secrets, including the very architecture of their defensive grid, a demand that felt like an existential surrender. "You ask us to lay bare our defenses before the very entity that demonstrated the ease with which you can penetrate them," Zarthus challenged Xyler in a heated, non-recorded session. "We are laying bare our obsolescence," Xyler retorted, the weariness of the political battle etching deep into his posture. "The humans are not asking to conquer us. They are asking for the raw materials necessary to stabilize the entire structure of local existence. If we continue to guard secrets that are already transparent to them, we guarantee our demise." Ambassador Vance returned to the Citadel for the official signing of the Covenant of Existential Maintenance, a document that effectively ceded primary defense and deep space strategic planning to the human protectorate's superior modeling and rapid response capabilities, while utilizing the hegemony's massive infrastructure for logistical support and material science. In the newly formed Joint Strategy Chamber, a space intentionally stripped of Volcari ornamentation to reflect the human emphasis on function, Vance stood beside Xyler, addressing the combined Volcari and human technical teams. "The silent architecture is accelerating its self-initiation sequence," Vance explained, gesturing to the complex, shimmering data models of the megastructure. "Its primary effect is the creation of a massive, subtle gravitational anomaly that is pulling interstellar dust and debris towards its core. This accretion is not random. It is highly structured, geometrically precise, and moving at an accelerating rate. We believe it is building a field generator." A Volcari astrophysicist, Dr. Nerva, raised a tentative question. "If it is accumulating mass at that rate, shouldn't we see the gravitational lensing effects across multiple systems? Why is it still so difficult to detect, even with human technology?" "Because," Vance replied, her tone softening slightly in recognition of Nerva's genuine intellectual curiosity, "the ancient architects utilized a mechanism of energy transfer we only partially understand. Informational inverse. Ion, the structure is not collapsing gravity into itself in the traditional sense. It is collapsing the asterisk information contained within the gravitational field, rendering the mass effectively invisible to conventional sensory models until the moment of its complete integration. The ghost ship, the asterisk Etheria, utilizes a highly constrained version of this principle for its stealth capabilities. We learned the physics from studying the residual effects of the silent architecture." This was the final, devastating revelation. Human advancement was not random invention. It was the result of the quiet, disciplined deconstruction of technology left behind by existential threats, adapted for ethical utility. They had learned to wield the instruments of cosmic scale. The joint teams worked frantically over the following cycles, integrating Volcari production capacity with human design philosophy. The focus was not on building weapons, but on producing thousands of localized stabilization nodes, small, complex devices designed to counter the informational inversion effect and slow the silent architecture's accretion rate. The logistics were staggering, requiring the hegemony's entire manufacturing base to pivot from conventional defense production to this esoteric, existential maintenance. As the deployment window approached, Zyler found himself watching the continuous live data feed of the silent frontier. He noticed a specific anomaly in the human operational plan, a point of deep concern. "Ambassador Vance," he queried during a brief moment alone in the chamber, "I observed the deployment vectors for the stabilization nodes. They are arrayed in a massive, geometrically perfect sphere surrounding the silent architecture. This is logical. However, I note that you have reserved the deployment of the Etheria Asterisk, the ghost ship, for the very center of the sphere near the structure's core. Why risk your most valuable asset in an environment that is rapidly becoming gravitationally unstable? Surely, its stealth capabilities are best utilized for long-range observation." Vance turned, the fluorescent holographic light catching the serious contours of her face. "The asterisk Etheria must enter the core, High Curator, because the function of the stabilization nodes is not merely to slow the accretion. It is to create a moment of precise, measurable asterisk instability around the core structure. We must provoke a reaction." Zyler recoiled. "Provoke? Why provoke a hyper-advanced, ancient intelligence whose objectives we do not understand?" "Because," Vance explained, her voice hardening with unavoidable logic, "the current state is passive, accelerating accumulation, which will eventually render the local systems uninhabitable. If the silent architecture is building an energy field generator, its power draw will eventually collapse the gravitational structure of this sector entirely. We cannot allow that slow, inevitable consumption. We must force it to communicate, or to cease its operation. The asterisk Etheria is the only vessel capable of navigating the localized informational inversions near the core without being instantly torn apart by gravitational paradox. And what is the nature of this communication you hope to provoke?" Zyler pressed, dread curling in his core. Vance looked at the image of the vast, dead structure, now faintly pulsing with generated energy. "If the architects are sentient, or if the structure contains a latent intelligence, the most profound disruption we can inflict is not physical destruction, which we are incapable of achieving, but a profound, ethical countersignal. We believe the architects designed this structure to ensure stability on a cosmic scale, perhaps by absorbing the chaos of a collapsing universe. If it has been inert for 30 million cycles, the initial conditions may have shifted, and its current protocol of accumulation may now be asterisk destabilizing existence, not protecting it." "So, you send the ghost ship to deliver a philosophical argument?" Zyler asked, incredulous. "We send the ghost ship to deliver asterisk proof of thriving, self-managing complexity," Vance confirmed. "A massive influx of stabilization nodes, perfectly positioned by the unified command of species that should, by cosmic probability, be at war. This is the signal. It is an argument for localized sapient competence. The Etheria will use its core navigation engine to broadcast a single, pure, ethical imperative directly into the structure's primary nexus. We are here. We are managing the chaos. You are no longer necessary for this function." The ghost ship, the vessel of impossible stealth, would perform the ultimate ghost strike. A silent, perfect philosophical declaration of self-sufficiency against the threat of cosmic automation. The deployment of the stabilization nodes was an operation of breathtaking scale and precision, managed entirely by human command algorithms utilizing Volcari logistical fleets. Thousands of hegemony vessels, moving with a coordinated discipline they had never before achieved, delivered the nodes to their predetermined coordinates, forming a colossal, invisible net around the silent architecture. The process took 3 full cycles of relentless, exhausting effort. In the joint strategy chamber, the atmosphere was one of silent, profound tension. Zyler, Zarthus, and the entire high command of the hegemony watched the projection, their fate resting on the performance of a single, undetectable human ship. The moment the final node was activated, the entire spherical network pulsed with a synchronized energy field designed to disrupt the informational gravity flow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the silent architecture, which had previously only pulsed with a faint, rhythmic geometry, reacted. It did not explode, nor did it send out a weaponized pulse. Instead, the structure began to illuminate asterisk, not with light but with the sudden, terrifying clarity of its sheer scale. Gravitational lensing snapped into agonizing focus around the perimeter, revealing the immense, terrible complexity of the ancient design. It was responding to the disruption, acknowledging the challenge. "The window is open," Vance announced, her voice the only sound in the chamber. Etheria has initiated its final approach to the core nexus. On the projection, the trajectory of the ghost ship was represented only by a faint, blue line of theoretical possibility. It plunged directly into the zone of highest informational inversion, where Volcari sensor data collapsed into white noise. The next moment stretched into an eternity. The silent architecture began to hum, a subsonic vibration that traveled through the spatial conduits and rattled the core integrity of the monitoring station, even light years away. Xyler watched the structure's geometric complexity begin to rearrange itself, responding to the forced instability of the surrounding field. Then, from the absolute center of the hyperlensing field, a massive wave of pure, non-localized energy erupted. It was not destructive, it was informational. It flooded the local sector with a complexity of data that overwhelmed the Volcari systems instantly. "We have the core broadcast," Nerva, the Volcari astrophysicist, shouted, her voice thick with awe. "It's responding to the *Etherius philosophical query. It's translating the imperative." Ambassador Vance moved quickly to a console, her fingers flying across the interface, attempting to parse the deluge of ancient information. The Volcari systems provided raw processing power. The human systems provided the linguistic and mathematical framework for interpretation. "The ancient architects," Vance stated, her voice tight with revelation. "They were not attempting to conquer or destroy. They were maintaining the structure of existence against the entropic collapse of an earlier universal cycle. This structure is a dormant computational mechanism designed to restart key stabilizing frequencies whenever the local chaos threshold exceeds a specific tolerance level. And our chaos threshold, the instability from the Kalis hub, the constant political tensions, it triggered the silent architecture's awakening," Xyler realized, the truth hitting him with visceral force. Their petty conflicts and inefficient technologies had nearly caused their own destruction by triggering an automatic cosmic defense mechanism designed to quarantine and stabilize excessive local entropy. "Precisely," Vance confirmed. "But the Etherius intervention, the demonstration of structured, proactive, ethical competence by multiple species, has presented a counterargument to the structure's core logic. The *Etheria is signaling that this region is under active management and does not require the automated, violent reset protocol that the architects had programmed millions of years ago." The informational pulse subsided. The illumination of the silent architecture began to dim, slowly, geometrically, receding back into the shadows of the void. Then came the final, overwhelming piece of data, channeled directly through the *Etherius core processor before the ghost ship initiated its silent retreat. It was a fragment of the architect's final, outgoing transmission, a single massive burst of information, a farewell message left before their own extinction. Ambassador Vance read the human interpretation, her eyes widening slightly in a rare display of surprise. The message, it is not a warning about the architecture itself. It is a warning about why they built it. She looked up at Xyler, the quiet tension in the room replaced by an entirely new, chilling fear, the fear of a truth too large to comprehend. "The architects were not protecting themselves from the chaos of the local cluster," Vance whispered, the enormity of the final twist settling upon her. "They were fleeing a predator, a consuming entity from the intergalactic void and intelligence that feeds upon the organized complexity of advanced civilizations. The silent architecture was not a stabilizer. It was a gigantic, complex quarantine marker and a delay mechanism designed to keep our galactic cluster stable and predictable, but also quiet long enough for the architects to escape its notice." Xyler felt the synthetic fear receptors in his exoskeleton activate, recognizing the ancient, deep terror encoded in the very structure of the message. The local conflicts, the need for resource management, the arrogance of the hegemony, all of it was a distraction from the fundamental, cosmic reality. They were living in a carefully constructed trap, designed to hide them from something immense and consuming. "The architect's message concludes with a single, repeating instruction," Vance stated, her voice returning to its measured certainty, but now infused with the weight of global responsibility. "It is a tactical assessment based on their own demise. They state that the only chance for survival against this consuming entity, which they refer to only as the Great Silence, is to integrate advanced, stealth technology with ethical velocity. They left the silent architecture as a shield, but they left us the asterisk knowledge of the informational inversion physics, the very knowledge required to build the asterisk Etheria asterisk, the ghost ship. They left the instructions for us to build the key to our own escape, the key to move beyond the boundaries of this quarantine. The ghost ship, the impossible vessel, had not merely saved the Volcari from themselves. It had revealed that its very existence was the fulfillment of an ancient, terrifying prophecy, a technological legacy meant to ensure that if local species attained true ethical and technological competence, they would possess the means to escape the coming doom. The ghost ship that shouldn't exist was, in fact, the only thing that should asterisk have existed. Asterisk High Curator Xyler stood on the precipice of the observation deck of the Citadel, looking out upon the vast, star-dusted arm of the galaxy that the hegemony had once believed they controlled. The covenant of existential maintenance had been ratified, not just by the Volcari, but by dozens of allied species who had quickly grasped the profound, undeniable truth presented by the human data. The fear of human competence had transformed into a necessary, desperate reliance. Ambassador Vance had not lingered. The asterisk Etheria had returned, silent and perfect, and the human protectorate had immediately pivoted their entire focus towards the colossal, generation-spanning project of building a massive, interspecies ghost fleet, vessels designed with the same informational inversion technology, capable of traversing the boundaries of the architect's quarantine field and exploring the vast, dark emptiness between galaxies, seeking a refuge beyond the reach of the Great Silence. Xyler was no longer a politician focused on internal governance. He was an administrator of a species preparing for a migration of unimaginable scale, guided by the silent, logical, ethical imperative of a younger species. He had learned humility through necessity. Curator Xarthus approached him, his usual bluster replaced by a quiet, controlled gravity. Xarthus had been assigned the crucial task of coordinating the industrial output for the Ghost Fleet components, a task requiring rigorous discipline and unprecedented efficiency, traits he had only grudgingly learned to respect in the humans. The first prototype subvessel, the Silent Vigil Asterisk, will be ready for field trials within the next tertiary cycle, Xarthus reported, his voice low. The human engineers require flawless execution, insisting that any material instability, no matter how minute, could lead to catastrophic informational resonance during the boundary transition. They trust our ability to manufacture, but they demand absolute perfection in design conformity. And do you believe we can meet their demand for perfection, Xarthus? Xyler asked, turning his gaze toward the former military hawk. Xarthus paused, reflecting on the months of intense, grueling collaboration with the human teams who worked without sleep, without complaint, and with an unwavering focus on the final consequence. He realized that human competence was not innate genius, but a profound, culturally ingrained discipline born of their own historical errors. "We can, High Curator," Xarthus admitted, a note of genuine respect entering his voice. "They do not demand faith, they demand proven, measurable consequence. They taught us that our scale was meaningless without precision. The irony is staggering. We feared the ghost ship because it meant war. We now embrace the ghost fleet because it means survival, and we must become as silent, as precise, and as ethically driven as they are, merely to keep pace with the necessity of the cosmos." Xyler nodded, looking toward the distant void where the island architecture now rested dormant, a vast, complex monument to a terrifying truth. "They are illogical in their emotional fragility, Xarthus, yet terrifyingly logical in their implementation of survival," Xyler mused, summarizing the human paradox. "They were the unexpected variable, the disruptive element that did not destroy the equation, but rather solved it. They are the species who learned the ultimate lesson of their past, that the path to true, eternal power is not through conquest, but through the silent, overwhelming obligation of care." He looked out into the darkness, contemplating the great silence that awaited them, the consuming predator that the architects had feared. The path ahead was terrifyingly vast, requiring the complete abandonment of the hegemony's entire historical narrative. Yet for the first time in millennia, Xyler felt not the dread of decline, but the cold, exhilarating focus of a species finally aligned with its true existential purpose. They would move, silent and unified, into the intergalactic dark, guided by the calm, necessary terror of the ghost ship that shouldn't exist, now the vanguard of all existence. The quiet strike had ended, and the massive, unspoken migration was about to begin. The human protectorate, once a dismissed footnote, had just given the galaxy its impossible future.